May is bright and celebratory as the May of English poetry. That's a direct quote from journalist Arifa Noor, painting a very vivid picture of Islamabad in May 2026. Just think about that for a second. We're looking at a country that, literally weeks prior, was bracing for war and staring down some incredibly deep domestic crises. And then, suddenly, almost overnight, the mood completely flips to poetry and celebration. It's kind of absurd how fast things changed, right? I am so glad you're here with us today, because we're going to break down exactly how this massive whiplash of a reversal actually happened.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating piece from Dawn called A Changed World. We're going to unpack Pakistan's totally unexpected geopolitical pivot. We'll look at their sudden triumphs, the macro global trends that made this all possible, how the neighbors are reacting, and finally, the impending reality check that might be waiting just around the corner.
So, here is the million-dollar question for today. How did a country once isolated by the war on terror suddenly become the world's favorite peacemaker? I mean, it sounds like the plot of a geopolitical thriller, doesn't it? A nation that was viewed basically through the lens of militancy for over 2 decades is suddenly racking up accolades as a trusted ally and a regional mediator. To really get to the bottom of this mystery, we've got to zero in on the events of one single pivotal month.
Let's jump right into Section 1, a month of triumphs.
Okay, let's unpack the specific events that totally flipped the script in May 2026. The sheer speed of this shift is honestly staggering. Right before May, the entire conversation in Pakistan was bogged down by a really messy domestic situation. We're talking highly contentious elections, severe economic fragility, and some pretty intense debates over the quality of their democracy. But then, almost literally overnight, the talk shifted entirely to military pride. Following the Pahalgam incident, which as you probably know was a severe border skirmish that brought the whole region to the brink of a massive conflict, Pakistan claimed a swift victory by downing multiple Indian aircraft. Suddenly, all that domestic gloom, poof, gone. It was entirely replaced by loud debates celebrating the Pakistani Air Force, the immense skill of their pilots, and the fact that their Chinese-supplied hardware successfully took down highly advanced fighter jets like the French Rafales.
And you know what? That military victory was really just the starting line. The global momentum just kept building, and the recent accolades are kind of dizzying. The recent Iran war actually added even more feathers to Pakistan's cap, putting Islamabad right in the center as a vital mediator and peacemaker. Then, the author points out this sudden bromance with the current occupant of the White House, U.S. President Donald Trump, who literally could not stop praising Islamabad. Pakistan rapidly found itself dubbed a trusted ally by sworn enemies, just soaking in this sudden, almost ironic wave of international glory.
Moving on to Section 2, How the World Changed. To really wrap our heads around the why this happened, we can't just stare at the events of May. We have to zoom out and look at the whole puzzle. This perfectly illustrates the macro shift Arifa Noor highlights in her piece. Back in the post-9/11 world, think the George Bush era, the absolute height of the war on terror, the international community viewed Pakistan almost exclusively through the lens of militancy. Think Al-Qaeda, IS, and intense international doubts, even when they were officially dubbed an ally. But fast forward to 2026 and, wow, it is night and day. Peacemaker, trusted ally, Middle East security provider. You really have to ask yourself, what on earth caused the world's memory to just wipe itself clean so fast?
Well, this transformation certainly didn't happen in a vacuum. The global environment basically got a massive update, and terrorism slid way down the priority list. First off, the US pulled out of Afghanistan. Then the world's attention got completely hijacked by economic stagnation, populist politics, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And finally, the events of October 7th and the massive Middle East crisis that followed totally reshaped global priorities. The focus shifted away from hunting terror groups to aggressively seeking regional stability and reliable security providers. Because the whole geopolitical environment changed, Pakistan's strategic value completely transformed right along with it.
Which brings us to Section 3, the neighbor's reaction.
So, with all these global tectonic plates shifting around, you're probably wondering about the view from right next door. According to our source, New Delhi's initial reaction to Pakistan stepping into the geopolitical spotlight was, well, basically confusion. As Islamabad started raking in all this international praise, India seemed genuinely flummoxed by this rapidly changing world order, initially reacting with what the author describes as pretty petty comments. But here's the catch. Are they moving from flummoxed to flexible? There's actually anecdotal evidence popping up right now, suggesting India recognizes this new reality and might be showing some flexibility to finally engage with Pakistan.
Look, India's past strategy was incredibly successful in that post-9/11 climate. After incidents like Mumbai, New Delhi expertly played the global mood to isolate Islamabad. They pushed hard to keep Pakistan penalized on the Fat Fifth list, the global financial watchdog, and successfully painted themselves as taking the tough stance against terror. But the future reality? It's a whole different ballgame. The author notes that the U.S. State Department is currently seen as too gutted to really tip the scales in India's favor right now, meaning New Delhi simply has to adapt. But, and this is a crucial neutral warning from the piece, even if official engagement does happen, it might not stop New Delhi from stirring up clandestine trouble inside Pakistan's own conflict zones.
All right, let's slow it down for Section 4, the impending reality check.
This brings us to absolutely the most critical realization of our explainer today. We've talked up the victories and these massive global shifts, but we really need to ground this in reality. The world is suddenly slapping this security provider label on Pakistan for the Middle East. And sure, it sounds incredibly impressive, but the author makes a fantastic point here. Pakistan might be completely missing the woods for the trees. There is practically zero clarity on what this shiny new title actually demands of the country. What are the real-world ramifications, good or bad, of being the region's top cop? The source highlights a pretty dangerous aversion back home to discussing this out in the open, warning that only a transparent, honest debate can prevent some seriously unexpected and unwelcome outcomes down the line.
Which leads us straight to the big question. Will the good times actually last? Will the bright, celebratory poetry of May 2026 become the new normal? Or are we just looking at a brief, lucky anomaly that's masking some much deeper, unresolved issues?
Well, when we take a hard look at the looming pressures on the horizon, the answer gets pretty sobering, pretty fast. This whole diplomatic high, it's incredibly fragile. First up, any instability in the Gulf is going to inevitably dump immense economic and political pressure right onto Pakistan's lap. Second, remember that bromance with the US we talked about? Yeah, that definitely comes with strings attached. The author reminds us it was actually the first Trump administration that originally started questioning Chinese loans to Pakistan, so we can absolutely expect renewed Western pressure regarding the whole Pakistan-China relationship. And finally, the massive elephant in the room, severe domestic economic fragility. The international breathing room Pakistan has just gained absolutely has to be used to fix its economy at home, not just to endlessly bask in the global glory.
And that brings us right to the final, unavoidable truth from our source material today. The good times will not last forever. Celebrations, accolades, they all have an expiration date. Pakistan has basically been handed this rare, golden window of international relevance simply because global priorities shifted. So the provocative question we're leaving you with today is this. Will Islamabad actually use this borrowed time to genuinely repair its fragile economic and democratic home front? Or are they going to be too distracted by the applause to see the storm gathering right on the horizon? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep a very close eye on how this geopolitical balancing act unfolds.